thank you very much for the ones that are remaining for our last but not least panel. The best is always at the end. Like, not to diminish the rest ones, but we are the people here. So for this last panel, that is it's going to be about intersectional feminists, how intersectional feminists need sex workers. And for this great panel, we have the presence of Lexi. Lexi is a performer, sex worker, activist, originally from California, sunny California, but conquering Berlin, Germany. It's a big applause for her. We have next is Sarah Chander. She is part of Equinox. This is the inter-racist network in Europe. Also a fantastic activist for the racial justice rights. So give an applause for Sarah, please. Next panelist is Nadia Van der Linde. She has been a great ally. She's part of the also Prostitution Information Center, but her work is mainly with this feminist organization, Women Equal Men. It's like WA, like equal men. It's very visual. So there's a discussion there inside. So thank you very much, Nadia, for being here. And finally, one of our new board member, Lila Milikj, from the Balkans, from Star. And well, we can. So, well, the intention of this panel is also to have a more intersectional view that also includes the vision of the anti-racist fight. There's a lot of voices and themes that intersectionality, like, it's a word that we put like everywhere, and sometimes it's like put, like randomly just to like check boxes, and sometimes it's not really addressed. Intersectionality has to be also has to address the anti-racist fight, or has to address the systemic causes that are the systemic problems that are caused by racism, by the system that is based in the racist preconceptions that come from, well, 500 years ago. That precisely today is October the 12th, so we're not celebrating anything. We celebrated yesterday the last day of freedom from our native populations in Abya Yala, or what you call as America. And I would like to say this, I would like to give the floor to Lexi. So you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lexi. I've lost my voice at the beginning of the week. It's not back. But I do have a beer here just in case I need to moisten my throat. Lubricate my throat, excuse me. I didn't bring any other lubes this trip. I am a mother, a performer, a BDSM provider. And while I support a lot of the ideals of feminism, I don't call myself a feminist. I unfortunately cannot do so because I believe that this current wave of feminism, this post-third wave feminism, is not inclusive. Right. So I unfortunately call it white woman feminism. Because this is like, listen, we need like white women as allies, don't get me wrong, but I feel that this particular wave is more supportive of white women than anyone else. And this is for cis white women, I also believe. I am not a cis white woman. I am a cis woman, but I believe very much in the equality and the recognition of trans people and anyone as they choose to identify. While I was in the States, had a very different mindset. But at some point I realized, why do I care what anyone else does with their life if they're not harming other people? And to me, this wave of feminism is harmful. I think the last inclusive wave was second wave. I think this is me personally as an American. I can only think about how feminism affects me as an American generally. I feel that it's more inclusive here in Europe, but in the States, it's not quite as inclusive. So I think it's very important for me to lend my voice to this movement. I would love for there to be a really cool fourth wave of feminism that's very inclusive, very colorful, very mixed up. But I don't think it's happened. And I'm not exactly sure what is the thing that's going to start this fourth wave. Because people are trying to tell me it's now, and I hope to God that this is not fourth wave feminism.
I'm not going to go in order, so don't panic. Nadia, I'm going to you. Yeah, that's. I want to, address a little bit what Lexi said. From the perspective from your organization, it's a feminist organization. What's the word that what's the work that we have to do for in this wave of feminism, fourth wave or whatever it is, which are like the challenges with them, and what's your point of view about this wave that we're facing?
The wave we are facing. So thank you so much, and Lexi, also thank you for your frankness in this. So yeah, I'm Nadia. I identify as a feminist, but there's many different types of feminisms, right? I don't identify in the same way as some people who consider themselves or who identify publicly as a feminist. So I think there's many different ways, and we need to build the feminist movements that we need to see and that we need, because we need the change. To me, feminism is about addressing power dynamics, right? About addressing injustices, inequalities, in all its intersectionalities, and it's definitely been missing out a lot. I mean, I totally agree, and I hear you, and I totally understand. Many racialized communities, sex worker communities, trans communities, and many others have often been excluded and also targeted with very harmful policies. And we also heard about it, of course, already in previous panels about the Swedish model or Nordic model, which is so well known, these countries, right, for their supposedly feminist policies and thinking. But then at the same time having practices and policies and laws in place that are so harmful for sex work communities and migrant communities, communities of color. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. That's also why I purposely put this shirt on. I identify as a feminist. And I identify as a puta feminista, which is a sex worker friendly and sex worker inclusive feminism that I believe in. And this terminology I learned from a sex worker rights activist, Georgina Orellano from Argentina, from the sex worker movement Amar. And I think they and many other sex worker groups and many of you have been incredibly inspiring and have over the years taught me a lot about feminism and about the world we need to see and about how to build more inclusive and diverse movements. And it's a struggle. We all struggle. There's no perfect out there, but the fact that we are struggling together and that we are creating these spaces to interact and to learn, right? And we sometimes fall and hit ourselves or each other very hard, and we try to get up. But I think, we will get better at this, and we will get better iterations of feminism and activism jointly that can really move things forward. I think this is also maybe if I can move on to that. Women Equals Men is a Dutch gender platform. We are a network of about 50 plus organizations, 100 plus individuals. Not all of them identify as feminists. It's a very diverse organization. Some are human rights organizations, some are women's rights organizations, some are development organizations or humanitarian aid organizations. It's quite diverse. Everybody supports moving towards and working towards gender equality and women's rights in all its diversity and inclusiveness. But at the same time, not everybody may be able to do everything or speak out on everything. And so we do have a mandate as Women Equals Men as well to speak out and support sex worker rights, but it doesn't mean that all our members do at this moment, right? Because different people, different organizations have different mandates and priorities. But it is something that we work on. We focus a lot in terms of the lobbying that we do for better international policies of the Netherlands. We focus on having policies that really are more inclusive and that really ensure participation and inclusion and rights of structurally excluded communities and structurally silenced communities. So this includes a lot of migrant communities, people of color, sex workers, trans people, people with disabilities, etc. We're able to work more proactively on these topics also thanks to partnerships. For example, we are part of a partnership called Count Me In, which is led by Mama Cash, a women's fund based in the Netherlands that has also been explicitly supportive of sex worker movement right from the start in '83 when it was established. And jointly we organized the Counting Sex Workers In campaign. And this really came from the idea of how can we as feminist and women's rights organizations be better allies? What can we do? And we realized there's of course a lot of painful communication and action by the SWERFs and the TERFs who were already mentioned both before in the panels, those people that consider themselves feminist or women's rights organizations, but that are explicitly anti-sex work. And so we want to build the allies, right? We need to work on this. There's a lot of work to be done. It's hard to reach the strongly identifying, anti-sex work folks, but there's a lot of middle ground there. What we like to call the movable middle, because we do feel that a lot of them are not necessarily yet capacitated. They don't necessarily have all the understanding or the knowledge, and definitely not yet the courage, perhaps, to speak out. But with our support, with our push, with our collaboration, we hope that we can get more women's rights groups and feminist organizations to be better allies and to be more outspoken. So that's what we're working towards. As part of this campaign, we made a whole bunch of fact sheets, which we're using to target different women's rights organizations. So really addressing different myths, right, around violence against sex workers, around sex work and migration, sex work and trafficking, really trying to clarify the different laws and legislations and their impacts in ways that we hope can really be understood well and susceptible for women's movements out there. And we've been working with sex worker-led organizations and allies and some governments to organize more spaces for sex workers to be heard and speak out, also at the UN. So, for example, at the Commission on the Status of Women, which is an annual meeting on women's rights in New York at the UN. We have been working with the Dutch government, organizing formal side events where actually sex workers were speaking inside the UN on a panel explicitly on sex worker rights, which had never happened in that space before. In the following years, we were able to organize such sessions again, and we were able to add governments. We added New Zealand, we've added Uruguay. We're now working on other governments to be added to co-host these sessions so that more governments are actually willing to organize these spaces and open up conversation on sex worker rights jointly with sex workers and with support of feminist organizations. So we hope that can contribute to moving things forward. I do see some opportunities with the growing anti-rights movements, anti-LGBT movement, anti-gender movements, anti-abortion movement, anti-sex worker movement that we see across the world, but also here in Europe. I think the fact that that movement has been growing and becoming so much more visible has resulted in some more mainstream organizations starting to wake up and starting to think, hey, wait, this can affect me, right? And so I think we can hopefully use that momentum to actually really build more allies and get stronger. I see some philanthropies, some funders also waking up and starting to become more explicit in their funding, supporting more intersectional funding for women's rights or for gender equality movements. And I feel there are opportunities in that for us to move forward and really make some change. When you see, things, negative developments happening, at the same time, you also see waves forward, right? We see some countries getting worse abortion legislation, but we also see other countries having improved abortion legislation. We need to make sure that we get more improved sex worker rights legislation around the world. We have Belgium as an example that we can move forward. So to really spread that more strongly and give critique of the harmful models that have been spreading through Sweden and France and Ireland. There's so much more to say, but thank you so much. It's been really amazing to be here and to listen and learn from all of you. I feel there's a lot more we need to do to get more women's rights and feminist organizing to collaborate together and to be more intersectional. And I think you, with these sessions that you're having here, are giving a great example.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I would like to give the floor now to Lila. As a trans woman, as a sex worker, and from North Macedonia, can you tell us how's the relationship between the trans movement, the sex worker movement, and let's say that the most from the mainstream feminism, and also if you have also some alliances in the more peripheral feminisms, we would like to know, because we are mostly come from Western Europe, and we have less knowledge from what's happening in the Balkans. So I would like to know what's the situation there, what's happening with feminism, and your relationship. For anything, Borsch is going to translate anything if Lila needs it. So.
Hi, I will speak in my language because my English is bad. Јас сум Лила Milikj, председателка на управниот одбор на СТАР, прв колектив на сексуалните работници, и исто така сум една од основачите на Трансформа. Трансформа е неформална група за заштита и промоција на трансродовите права во Република Северна Македонија.
Good afternoon all. My name is Lila Milikj. I'm a president of the management board of STAR, the first sex workers collective based in the Balkans, registered in the Balkans. Moreover, I'm one of the co-founders of the first informal transgender group of also of transgender people in North Macedonia. It's called Transforma. And recently, I became a board member of the European Sex Workers Alliance.
Јас би зборила малку повеќе за трансродовото движење во Северна Македонија. Исто така, кој нажалост од година на година се е помало и помало поради недостаток на системот кој што го имаме во државата. Повеќето трансродови сексуални работници се преселени во Белгија, Холандија и Германија.
The focus of my speech, what I'm gonna point it out, is the lack of the transgender movement in North Macedonia, as because of the no existing of any laws that will protect the transgender rights. Many of them just left the country and they migrated to another countries, especially to Western European countries.
Во Македонија постои феминистичка група, но нажалост немаме некоја соработка со низ, имаме со неколку луѓе од неколку организации кои што се споени во феминистичката група.
In Macedonia, there are a couple of feminist groups, but we don't have any specific collaboration with them.
И затоа би се осврнала повеќе на трансродовите права во, тоест на трансродовото движење во републиката.
I will refer my speech more about the transgender movement in the country.
Трансродовото движење започнува во 2017 година. Стануваат ствари трансродовите сексуални работници повидливи од претходно. До 2017 година трансродовите лица се буквално невидливи во организациите.
So our transgender movement in Macedonia started just in 2017. So before 2017, there is no evidence of any transgender movement in the country.
Од 2017 година до 2020 година се зајакнуваат капацитетите на трансродовите лица, за да може да може слободно да си ги бараат своите права.
So since 2017 till 2020, we as an informal group were working on the strengthening capacity of our movement, so to be able to demand or to work on advocacy for our rights.
Благодарение на стар првиот колектив на сексуални работници ја препознава оваа група како група на која што е потребна, на која што се потребни, на која што е потребна помош во однос на решавање на проблемите.
So thanks to the existence of STAR, the first sex workers collective in the Balkans that I worked for, STAR has recognized us as a transgender movement and assisted us in building our capacities.
До 2019 година ние бевме како транслица бевме во препознае, тоест не бевме препознаени како транслица, туку се водевме во ЛГБТ популацијата во националната стратегија за ХИВ. Така да можноста на СТАР заедно со Трансформа од 2019 година работевме на препознавање на трансродовите лица како посебна категорија и работевме на тоа да трансродовите лица имаат свои ексклузивни потреби и проблеми.
So till 2019, transgender community wasn't recognized by the Ministry of Health. So the transgender people doesn't have any access to healthcare services. We were classified only as LGBT population, but we are still different from them. So thanks to STAR, we give a lot of efforts and we work together with the Ministry of Health in order to recognize us as a specific community in the national HIV strategy.
Минатата година јас и Борча заедно се сретнавме со представниците од Комисијата за ХИВ и Националната комисија, каде што им ги представивме нашите потреби и нашите барања.
Borche is a member of the National HIV Commission within the Ministry of Health, so he invited me last year to be like a guest on one of the meetings the Ministry of Health, the Commission, has with the entire Commission.
Нажалост, тоа во 2020 година не фати сите пандемијата COVID, каде што многу работи се стопира, процесите се беа стопрени.
But unfortunately, after this meeting and once we started the process, the pandemic started and everything was stopped.
И тогаш кога се фокусиравме на потребите на трансродовите лица во 2020 година, СТАР заедно со Трансформа направи брзо истражување во однос на влијанието на COVID пандемијата врз благосостојбата, социјалната и здравствената заштита на сексуалните работници, каде што тоа истражување додовме до за, тоест самите испитаници кажаа дека најголемиот проблем со кој што се соочувале во COVID пандемијата е недостаток на храна, недостаток на плаќање режитски трошоци.
So in order to get more specific review of the problems that transgender sex workers faced in the country, in 2020 we did a a fast assessment of the sex workers' needs on the social, healthcare, and economic well-being of sex workers. And we find out that at that time, transgender sex workers also face with a lack of food, or their access to food, to rent was and overheads was especially transgender sex workers were not able to pay for their daily life.
Па од тука Стар заедно со Трансформа, сепак благодарение на Стар заедно со Трансформа излеговме во пресрет на трансродовите луѓе, на трансродовите сексуални работници, каде што ние како организација им овозможувавме храна за они да можат да си ги платат своите режиски трошоци.
So since then, and while we are not recognized as a specific community, STAR in its operational activities provide some separate funds for our specific transgender communities, and I was engaged to deliver some necessary food and helping transgender sex workers to pay the rent and etc.
Во 2021 година, исто ова истражување за COVID-19 можете да го најдете на страната на веб страната на Star, која што го има и преведено на англиски.
You can find this assessment. I mean, it's a paper research. You can find them on the web page of STAR. It is available in English as well.
Страната која не знае www.starsexwork.org.
You heard starsexwork.org.
Во 2021 година Стар исто заедно во соработка со Трансформа направивме истражување во однос на здравствените потреби и проблеми на трансродовите лица.
In 2024, Star and Transforma together make another research to assess the needs of transgender people in the healthcare system.
Кој што исто достапно на страната на англиски јазик.
Which is also available on the STAR website.
Од тоа истражување дојдовме до податоци дека трансродовите лица не се третираат еднакво во здравствениот систем, како во рутални прегледи, така и во прегледи за медицинско потврдување на родот.
So the findings from the research are that the transgender people are not recognized as a separate community, and they have no access to treatment and hormones as well.
Најтешкиот проблем е тоа што, како што кажа Борче во моментот, недостатокот на хормонска терапија и недостапноста на хормонската терапија за трансродовите лица. Од тука трансродовите лица нарачуваат терапија од странство, каде што дополнително се ставаат во ризик, бидејќи не знаат што може да добијат.
Since the transgender people in North Macedonia are not able to get their hormones, they order the therapy online or by friends, by a foreign country, and they also face with a challenge to get the therapy on a time and also pay a double price for it.
Исто така, трансродовите лица трансродовите жени кои што сакаат, кои што идат на менување, тоест на менување на полот, нема достапност до операции, дали се тоа отстранување на влакна, дали се тоа силикони на гради или следната операција.
So transgender people also they don't have access to a surgery and surgical and non-surgical interventions.
Што дополнително заради тие причини ствари бегаат од државата, доаѓаат во европските земји за да може да се реализираат како транс особи.
By all this reason, so with no access to surgical and non-surgical interventions and no access to hormonal therapies, transgender move to another countries.
Исто така, накратко би спомнала околу законот за правно признавање на родот, кој што исто така битен за транс луѓето. Работиме од 2019 година во однос на донесување на закон за правно признавање на родот, но во 2020 година, нажалост, антиродовото движење зема голем замав и законот е скроз тргнат, тој е стопиран.
So starting from 2019, we started to work on the development of a new law on legal sex recognition, legal gender recognition. But later, from 2020, the anti-gender movement in Macedonia, which is really strong, they just stopped us in our fight to create a new law.
И еве една позитивна работа за крај, можем да кажем дека Стар издвои победа во однос на законот за законот за сексуална работа, каде што прекршочниот закон претходно беше тој што се оддава на проституција на јавен простор ке се плаќа казна од 600 до 800 евра, но сега намаливме таа сума и таа сума е сега од 150 до 200 евра.
So in June 2020, Star was invited and represented by the president of Star, Borche, within the Ministry of Justice Working Group to amend the Criminal Code of North Macedonia. As a result, we've been successfully involved in this process, and we formally submitted contribution with proposed amendments to the Criminal Code. So in the meantime, as a result of our previous efforts of the community advocacy and similar initiative for sex work decriminalization submitted to the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, the parliament demonstrated political will by voting to reduce the fines for sex worker in the law on misdemeanors against the public order, which classifies the performance of sex work or resorting to prostitution as a violence against the public order. And as Lila said, in a small but very important community victory, the fines for prostitution in North Macedonia since this summer have been reduced from the range 600 to 800 euros to the range 100 to 200 euros.
Thank you so much, Lila, for this amazing work. And it's also a lot of things to do in Macedonia, in North Macedonia, not only for sex workers, but also for trans people themselves. Now I'll go to Sarah. Sarah, as your work in anti-racism and as into the feminist movement, what's the view from an anti-racist organization as Equinox around sex work, around this relation with the main feminism, how the peripheric or Black feminisms are addressing this the issue of sex work? So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And just to say, cannot tell you how much of a huge honor it is to be in this space where everyone in this room is just speaking and sitting in their own power. And that is just like the best way I could spend a Wednesday evening. So thank you for that. Yeah, as Sabrina says, I am here on behalf of Equinox, Initiative for Racial Justice. We are quite a new organization. We are people of color led. And we're working for racial justice. Specifically, what we're doing is advocacy on laws and policies at the EU level, so here in Brussels. And we're also trying to build coalitions with other movements, ESWA included, to see how we can advance racial justice, but also more broadly, social justice for everybody. We're working on a number of different topics. Like I won't talk too much about that. It's climate, justice and race, migration, policing. We have a report called Who Protects Us from the Police, where we also talk about the issues that sex workers also face with police. And also finally, we have some work that we've done on the issue of gender justice, which I think is most relevant to the conversation today we had already about feminism and the link between racial justice, feminism, sex workers' rights, and actually, how do we promote feminism that really is on behalf of all of us and not just some of us, not just on behalf of white, cis, middle class women, right? I actually don't know if I feel, I completely get that why we would not, we would be suspicious of the term feminism. Maybe like, you didn't say this, but yeah, a lot of feminist work is trash, right? It's not inclusive of many of us, of people of all genders, of trans people, of non-binary, of racialized people, and of sex workers, of course. And we're seeing that show up in how sort of mainstream women's organizations, mainstream feminist organizations do their work. We're also seeing that in the laws and policies of our governments and in the EU level. We're seeing that very much. And as if we didn't have to fight for all of that, of course, we are seeing it in the anti-gender movement. We're seeing it in the rise of the far right, who often are trying to sort of co-opt our movements against each other. So they're trying to use white, straight family values as a reason to say that we, either as migrants, as Muslims, as Black and brown people, as sex workers, are somehow not good. We're the reason that there are problems in this world. So I completely get why we would be suspicious of the term feminism. To be honest, I'm not sure if I think it matters whether we like the term feminism or not. But I think what does matter is actually what do we stand for. And the main thing I would want to say is that I think that there are a couple of things that we could think about as a common agenda. The link between sex workers' rights and racial justice, and why, to answer the question of the panel, why intersectional feminism needs sex workers. And so there are a couple of things. Before I say those three things, I would want to say when we built Equinox, when we started the idea, we knew from the very moment we started that it had to be a sex worker inclusive movement. We had to build a space that eventually also sex workers would want to be a part of, because racial justice is completely, for us, compatible with sex workers' rights. And for us, that meant like a couple of things. Like it meant that we had a responsibility to align with a certain few priority areas or a number of political issues. Mainly because knowing, and Edward's research really showed us this, the majority of sex workers especially in Western Europe, are racialized people. I think the figure that you had in your report was 65%, so that's huge. And then also in Eastern Europe too, we see that, 16 to 70%. So it's a really big number, and even bigger when we look at like migrants' rights, undocumented people too. So inherently, just from the numbers, sex workers' rights is a racial justice issue. We can't ignore that as the racial justice movement. But we didn't think that actually mainstream anti-racism organizations were actually taking up the fight of sex workers' rights maybe as much as they should. So we thought from our perspective, that's our responsibility. But equally from the sex workers' rights movement, that's a responsibility too. So I really appreciate the work you've been doing to do the BIPOC Academy and other also just like a critical analysis of your own movement as well, to say, okay, where are the racialized people in the room? Because we know that actually racialized sex workers are some of the most marginalized in our community and have the needs that we need to be meeting as a movement. So I appreciate that like back and forth change of actually let's critique our own movements and see what is our responsibility as movements to register that actually racialized sex workers' needs are what we need to prioritize. Thanks. Basically, they're the three things that are, well, I think, are the link between racial justice and sex workers' rights, and why intersectional feminism needs sex workers. They've already been said, so I'll be really quick. The first is, this principle of economic justice and work. So even if you take aside the issue of sex workers' rights, we know that Black and brown people, racialized people, undocumented migrants are most likely to be in precarious work. They're most likely to be working in exploitative work conditions. And sex workers' rights is also another example of that. If we do see exploitative conditions there on the table, we're also probably really likely to see different racialized people most likely to be in those conditions. So if we're going to address that, economic justice and the notion sex workers work, but also what more do we need to do to make fair working conditions? And that should be a priority for us. One of the problems, I think, of second, first wave feminism is, they didn't address also class. And that for us is a huge problem in the racial justice movement, but it's also what the feminist movement needs to do better if it's going to be useful at all. So that's the first. Well, let's see. Whether do they properly address class? Maybe that's the issue. The second issue is what we talked about quite a lot throughout the whole day about the issue of criminalization. Is something that obviously the racial justice movement have been talking about for a very long time. You maybe heard we're very suspicious of the police, racial profiling, police brutality. Black and brown people in Europe experience that, Roma experience that. And so we have always been very skeptical of actually what could criminal justice reform do? And is that really a racial justice approach? As your report said, that's really an issue for sex workers too. So let's think about more meaningful ways that we, number one, address police brutality and all the issues that we're having with the police, but also, let's think about criminalization more broadly. So as one of the previous panels said, is our idea that we just want to make the police better, make them nicer? Or is it actually, do we want to think about the role of criminalization in our society and stop ignoring state violence more generally? I think a lot of the existence of the criminal justice system in Europe, or the criminal injustice system in Europe, is very predicated on our oppression. It's predicated on the idea that we, sex workers, Black and brown communities, Roma communities, are inherently criminal. So actually there's a question of, can that be reformed? And we think probably not. The same for the migration system. Looking at the police and looking at the migration without criminalization is actually very hard because it's the basis of these systems, right? So this is another issue that we need to address. And we also need to question the idea that adding more crimes, giving more money to the police, giving the police more technologies and infrastructure is going to make us safer. So that's, I think, a number two on our common agenda between racial justice and sex workers' rights. The last one, and I love to hear this like throughout the whole day, is need, like refocusing the energy, the time, the resources, the money, most of all, towards meeting our needs. Like the question of getting hormones, the question of having jobs, the question of paying our rent, et cetera, the list goes on. For me, it's a very radical, revolutionary thing to talk about, and it's also very obvious as well, right? So we're talking about the question of how do we empower ourselves? Money is the central question, but are actually we having enough conversations about what the hell do we do with all that money? So if it wasn't in borders and fences and police and surveillance technology, what would we want to do with that money? I think in this space, we're pretty clear what we would want to do with that money, but that broader conversation, I think it was one of the interventions over there in the last Q&A, was basically saying we actually need more of a common agenda for economic justice in all of our movements. Like what positive economic policies do we want to see? And I think that's a number one sort of link between another racial justice and sex workers' rights as well. We all have economic issues. We're all economically oppressed in many circumstances. So let's make a common agenda for that. So that's the third issue. Generally, I think that like we have a very strong common agenda, and ESWA really doing some cool work to like link up migrants' rights organizations, feminist organizations, racial justice organizations with the sex worker rights movement. I find it actually that quite exciting that that's happening. And this common agenda, you already kind of see it taking place. And I think that maybe that's where we need to address more of our energy towards. So yes, we want decrim, but beyond decrim, not just of sex work, but of everything. We want to question the role of police in our society. We want to get rid of the borders. We want economic justice, and we want, the 5,000 a month that someone said at the back that the European Parliament members get. All of that is a very exciting and actually realizable, like it's possible, common agenda that we have. So let's focus our resources on working together and building power towards that. And I'll stop there.
I feel that it's a very little to add, but it's my turn. It's my turn, and I'm in the program, so it's my turn. Yeah, my experience in feminist spaces or so-called feminist spaces as a trans woman, as a sex worker, has been on the main stages, or on the where all the mainstream of the feminists gets united. We have suffered. I think we have suffered, and I have colleagues here also from Spain that experience the same thing. Way more violence and way more attacks, but like more unhearted from in those places that are supposed to be no mixed, and we must have the sorority and care, and sometimes words that are just like that words, like sometimes the word intersectionality, and you see it's only cis white women, and it's like, okay, where is the intersectionality there? And has been also a place of resistance, but it's also a place that we have to claim, because we also built that resistance. In fact, sex work, when you decide to keep on going in this industry, it becomes a real anti-patriarchal tool. Maybe you can hear voices that can say the contrary, that it's like, no, it's like you're the allies of patriarchy. Well, yeah, but we are not getting married with the clients. No, we are charging for an hour, and let's go back for you, dear abolitionists. So that's the thing. It's like they are kind of pissed because we fuck their husbands, but we don't wash the underwear, and we just take the money. So yeah, that's a little bit personal from them, but has been a place of resistance, but also it's a place of encounter. We have also have the luck to find allies, to find women and feminist women and trans feminist women and Black feminists, and basically the peripheral feminisms that are not in the government, so they're not in the academia. We have found those networks of real solidarity, of real sorority, when we needed it, during the pandemic. Many of all those women that we connected with in those wild assemblies previous to the International Women's Day in Spain, that are wild since a time ago. My colleague Belen smiles because she has suffered as well. And but also when you realize that you have those alliances, that you have those activists, those feminist activists that are also committed, that understand that this is a labor rights issue, that it's not a couple relationship. This is not a romantic relationship. This is a labor issue, and in every labor issue, there's going to be disparities. So we can they cannot pretend to equalize a commercial transaction, a business, to put it in the same level as a romantic or a sentimental relationship that is not. So that's also the first mistake, that the misconception about sex work has to be just because sex is involved, and we have all this spider webs in the head of the people that cannot separate sex from something else, that think that it's inconceivable. Pay for that in a capitalistic world, that you can pay for almost like for getting water, for getting food, basically to give birth, to die, you also need money because otherwise, like, but results that the other thing that you cannot ask for money is for sex. So that's in that in lack of consistency. Sometimes the most feminist things to do that maybe that the non-sex workers, the civilians, maybe should start to charge for everything, every attention that they are giving to cis hetero men, basically. And maybe that will be a good change. That would be a less to be the necessary crutch for patriarchy. Because you realize that also as a sex worker that cis hetero men are more interested in money than in real sex. So that's also another myth that it's down, that there are a lot of demand and we have to punish. No, we have more need and more necessity to sell that sexual service because we need to survive than men to be willing to or demand to buy sexual services. This is basically the misconception of everything. And unfortunately, those misconceptions are used to legislate, are used to make laws without consulting us at all, because that's also a very unfeminist thinking, that you think that we are stupid, that we are not able to organize a conference for 200 people, bring them from all over Europe, and talk about very serious and very serious issues, and very with a great level of reflection. And as Sarah said, we also have this internal criticism that makes a movement, because if a movement doesn't have also conflicts and doesn't know how to resolve those conflicts, it becomes a cult. And it becomes a cult where, the feminist authorities that are from prime ministers, from, I don't know, the next best artist that goes with a t-shirt with feminist, and everybody believes that she's a feminist. Where's that is where everything bad starts, and it's that misconception where the laws are created since from that believing that we come from, we don't know where, maybe the sewer, that we don't bring kids to school, we don't take care of parents, we don't go to the supermarket and buy like everybody else, because they are insisting on reinserting us in society, when sometimes that sorority or that lack of insertion has to be applied by those cis-white feminists that usually can have a racialized woman to be housekeeping while she is like in the European Parliament or in the government or in the academia, advocating and making theories for other less privileged people that hers. So this is a matter of survival. I think that if mainstream feminists wants to take or keep the trademark for selling T-shirts, we can leave them. I think that the ideas and also the conviction that we have as let's say, like, as feminists are very feminist, as known as feminists that are not in the cultural feminism or the mainstream feminism. I think we still have a lot to work. We have so many things in common that the ones that we have in law and that we don't have in common. And we have to keep working. We have been doing a great work in the regional level by isolating the European Women's Lobby. Thank you for all the, yes, we've been isolating them. And also, it's I think we have created a small house on that, because there's like they've been like headless. There are no directors, or they're like a little bit like that. So we have done a great job, and I'm saying this. Tomorrow we're going to present a coalition of sex workers for the sex workers organization for the sex worker rights, and Equinox is part of it. But this is a great part of the labor of the work that we have been doing with allies, with platforms with PICOM, with NR, with ILGA, with TGU, with Estrada. We are majority. The thing is that they are more better funded, as Lucas said. They are more organized. They have the power. They have the big speakers. But we have the reason. We are the right side of history, and we are demonstrating and making history since yesterday, since it started. We can do things better. We can achieve the changes that we need to improve our lives, or at least that they are not so miserable, that given that we live in the capitalist world and it's like our lives are miserable anyway, but at least to be a little bit less, and trying to leave the terrain settle also for the sex workers that are going to come behind us, that are already there, and that they would need good legal tools to defend themselves. We don't need rescue. We need only the laws that can make us protect ourselves by ourselves without any rescue. And just to finish and go for the Q&A, I would like to repeat this saying that we have in Spain. That is something like, we are beautiful, we are smart, we are feminist whores. So in Spanish is, somos guapas, somos listas, somos putas feministas. Now it's your turn. Do you have anything that you can add, that you would like to add? Some comment? I would love to hear your voices, or unless you want to go drink now.
And thank you so much to everyone on the panel, and thank you so much to everyone on the conference organizing team as well for the last few days. It's been amazing. Closer. Oh God, I hate microphones. Yeah, I really appreciated, Sarah, what you were saying about sort of like a suspicion at the term feminist. I think I feel a bit similarly, or maybe like ambivalence. And for me personally, I think I feel much more aligned with describing myself as like a prison abolitionist, which I think isn't something that has been discussed a lot in this conference. So I really also appreciated you speaking about, like, can we reform the criminal justice system? And for me, I think that sex workers make natural prison abolitionists, because we know that police don't keep us safe. We know the criminal justice system is not set up for us, especially for sex workers of color, trans sex workers, undocumented migrant sex workers. But there isn't a lot of discussion, I think, about prison abolition within sex worker spaces, and vice versa. I think that there's not as much discussion as there could be about the struggle for sex workers' rights within prison abolitionist discourse. So I guess my question to the panel is maybe either why do you think that is, or either how do you sort of see struggles for sex worker rights sitting within broader discussions around abolishing prisons, defunding police, dismantling the sort of pastoral criminal justice system that exists?
Yeah, I can start, and then I'm sure others, because yeah, to be honest, like maybe I'm a good person to answer this, because I'm in the racial justice space, which I think is not, I would say a complete overlap with the police and prison abolitionist spaces, but many of them would say that they are racial justice activists. I think one of the reasons is like laziness. I think there is like an ideological laziness about not making the links between our movements in not just anti-racism spaces, but in many spaces. Some of it doesn't come from like being against sex workers' rights, but actually not doing the work of making the links with those movements. So I think that's maybe one reason. And then I think the other reason is that, it's also about representation in those spaces too, right? So we've critiqued for many reasons why anti-racism space and also feminist spaces don't have enough racialized people. They, like, even racial justice spaces don't have enough sex workers in leadership in those spaces, don't have, and often they're cis men, sometimes cis men of color, cis white men in those spaces. So I also think there's that. Maybe people don't feel personally implicated in those issues because also of how they compose the movements, right? And I think, like, at least of a lot of police abolition work and prison abolition work I have seen is a lot of either academic discourse or anarchist work, like quite a lot of grassroots work that is doing direct action, which is great, but we also need to think about safety in those spaces. And at the same time, I think it would be great if sex workers' rights movements joined up in war with prison abolition. I also think it's the responsibility of anti-racism spaces and prison and police abolitionist spaces to also say, okay, but what are you doing to make people safe if they were to come to your action or if they were to come to your event on prison as abolition, especially because I believe that in those spaces, there's a lot of police surveillance, one thing, or surveillance in general. And also, I'm not sure that they make those spaces safe also, just in terms of like the language that's used, hypermasculinity that's in that space, et cetera, like how they build those spaces themselves. So yeah, laziness, not doing enough work and not making enough connections between the movements politically. Would you like to?
Another question? You understand that? Yeah, I know it's tired. I want to go to sleep. So, well, I think we can wrap it up here. I want to thank you all for being in this panel, and after some of you, the ones that have been in the conference, thank you for all these great days. Thank you, Lexi. Thank you, Lila. Thank you, Borsha. And thank you also, Sarah and Nadia, for coming today. I think we can conclude the conference for today. All the panelists have been fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Also for your opinions, for your questions, for your knowledge that we are all sharing this knowledge exchange conference and event. And we see you tomorrow in the European Parliament at 11. We will go out from here around 10:30 or something like that. We will use public transportation. And thank you very much. We'll go to the agenda now. That remember to have your badges for one free drink. That is like soft drink or beer, not or wine, not cocktails, but it's something. So it's very close. It's 200 meters from here to the gay district. And enjoy the rest of the conference, the party, and thank you all very much.